Well, I thought we'd concentrate in this first session on the anatomy and physiology of the yoga postures, particularly. And in the next session, we'll probably talk some more about nutrition and then the yogic approach to various diseases, to have some kind of understanding for you as teachers when your students ask different questions about the yogic approach. So, how I got interested in yoga was through medical school, because while I was studying medicine, I began to see that more and more of disease had a preventive aspect. If you go to any major hospital and interview the patients and try to come up with categories, people get sick and are in the hospital in this country mainly because of 4 areas: cigarettes, alcohol, overeating or the wrong kinds of food, and the 4th area being stress. So that pretty much all the different diseases, even the ones we don't understand, like breast cancer, it's about 10 times more common in overweight women. So even diseases that we don't clearly understand the root cause of, we at least begin to see that they have a preventive aspect. And that's where the beauty of yoga comes in, because it can be a tool that we can use to deal with the root cause of the cigarettes, alcohol, overeating, wrong kinds of foods, which really those 3 areas are basically, could be subsumed under the 4th area, which is stress, because people misuse their bodies and put poisons into their bodies because of anxiety and stress. And yoga not only teaches us how to deal with the stress once it occurs, but gives us a tool to prevent the buildup to reach the level of disease. So really, when we look at the word disease, we get an idea. We're born with pretty flexible bodies. Any baby can do any yoga posture, put its toe in its mouth, whatever. But as we live our stiff lives, the spine becomes stiff, and all the nerves come out through the spine to the various organs you can see from this chart. The autonomic nervous system, how the nerves come out through the spine, and how important it is to return that flexibility. So I'm just going to keep this available, and afterwards you can take a look and see. We'll be talking more about the autonomic nervous system too. Well, we're born with this ease, and then we gradually disturb it by different poisons or different stresses, and so we get disease. So that's where yoga gives us the tools to, 1, return us to the feeling of ease, and 2, help us to see where the disturbances come in. Because if we're more in touch with that ease, then we can watch how the mind, how we dig our own holes and fall in them. And meanwhile, when we're in the hole, not to regret how terrible it is in there, but to see how we are responsible for that. Well, the study of the human body is really so beautiful and exciting to me. I got interested in medicine when I was about in 4th or 5th grade and saw a movie called Hemo the Magnificent, which shows the blood coming through the capillaries and how beautiful it all orchestrates itself. It's really exciting to see how everything fits together. And I think that a yogic approach to the study of anatomy can be very useful. So what I thought I'd start out with tonight is to just go over some of the basics of anatomy, and then have our person who's going to demonstrate go through the yoga postures and show the effects on the body. So have you come up now. I'll get reorganized here. And why don't you just sit down here? Now, to study the human body, it's useful to divide it into systems. I think this is an easy way to have a good grasp on what's going on rather than studying regions. In medical schools, many medical schools study the human body by areas. If they study the arm, and then they'll study the chest. And that really doesn't make sense, because what really makes sense in terms of the way the body functions is that certain systems do certain activities. So the 7 systems are basically skeletal bones, and there's about 204, 206 bones. Muscular, and there are hundreds of muscles. Then digestion, how we take food in. Respiration, how we add the oxygen to burn up the food, to fuel the fire or whatever. Then circulation, how we take it around to the parts of the body. Nervous system and endocrine system, how the body communicates its various activities. And excretion and reproduction. So if we study those particular systems, we can see what's happening with the body more. So to start out with the bones, fascinating. The bones are living tissue. We think of them as sort of solid, and that's what's left when all the living stuff is gone. But actually, they're constantly being renewed. And when the astronauts went into space and weren't subject to gravity, they had a lot of problems. They had to feed them special mineral supplements and so forth. And they discovered that the use of our body renews our bones. That's why in cultures like the Andes and the areas of South America where the people live to be 120 or 130 or even 100, and the areas of Russia where they live into 130, 140, they're very active, and they don't get the kind of bone diseases that you see in this country, hunched over like this, and so many hip fractures. The chances of fracturing the hip is very high, especially in women in this country, when we reach 60s and 70-year-old, 80-year-old. But in those countries, you don't see those pathological fractures, is what they're called. And they've x-rayed the bones and compared the bones of these countries, and they found that they don't see that wasting away, osteomalacia, or kyphosis of the spine, where the bone demineralizes itself and you get permanently fixed in one position, because the people remain active. They walk every day up and down the mountain. And as long as they keep walking, the bones keep renewing themselves. But in our culture, people stop being active when they reach 40 and 50 or 30. And because they stop being active, the bones stop renewing themselves. And so this gradual process becomes accelerated, and by the time we hit 60 or 70 in our culture, the bones have really lost much of their minerals. So we can take a lesson from outer space and realize how important it is to keep using the body. As we use it, it renews itself. Use it or lose it, you can say. So that's true of the skeletal system. And really, it's the constant use of the way we use our bones that determines their position in our body. That's why yoga is so useful, because it begins to restore the proper positioning of the bones. When we sit forward like this, which is a very common habit in our culture, why don't you try doing that? Must be. Yeah. What happens is that the lungs can't expand fully, and the heart gets constricted, and you also feel lousy. Because when you meet someone who's sitting like this, you have a very different feeling than if you meet someone who's sitting like this. It has an effect on our own psychological state, how we use our system, how we use the body. So Hatha Yoga, or the asanas, can be the beginning point of the awareness of how you use the body. Not only doing the Hatha Yoga in the morning, but we're doing yoga all the time. We're just not doing very good Hatha Yoga. we may do Hatha Yoga in the morning for a separate length of time, but asana means seat or how you sit. And so that occurs every minute of the day. So really we're doing asanas every minute, only we're not usually aware of them, and we're not usually doing very good asanas. So the beginning is to do the Hatha Yoga for a period of time in the morning and in the evening, but the ultimate thing is to use the body all day long in a good, appropriate way. And the body works much better if it's sitting up straight. Because as I showed in this picture, all the nerves coming out to the organs, all the nerves below the neck come out through the spine. And so if there's tension in the spine, it's going to affect those organs and going to affect the way we feel about ourselves and our psychological attitudes too. They interplay with each other. So structurally, one of the best positions for the human body is the full lotus. If you could just sit in full lotus for a minute. And when I talk about structure of the body, bones and muscles, it's really a perfect structure. Because if you extend your elbows a little bit, you'll see what he's got there is a pyramid. A four-sided figure, one side, one side, one side, one side. So, and a pyramid is a very stable structure, you see? So you make a pyramid out of your own body by sitting in full lotus. And in fact, on the back of $1 bills, you'll see a pyramid with an eye on the top. And that's just the human body with the spiritual eye opened. So it's a beautiful structure, and they've done some studies with heart patients, and they taught them how to sit in full lotus, and they found that their cardiac work was less. Their heart didn't have to work as hard. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One is that, especially in our culture, we tend to sit in chairs. And really, this is very difficult for the heart to deal with, because if you extend your legs down, you'll see that the heart has to pump back up against gravity. Whereas if you keep the legs up close to the body, it doesn't have to pump against the force of gravity. Also, when you sit in this position, it constricts a little bit the blood flow to the legs, because there's a little pressure there, so not as much goes into the legs. And that's important because there's more than blood available for the upper parts of the body. And we only have 8 pints of blood in our body. It's a restricted amount. It represents oxygen to the tissues. And more blood available to this higher centers is especially what's useful for meditation. Not so much goes down to the legs. And sitting in chairs tends to pool the blood in the feet. And you see in old people in our country, gigantic ankles, all swollen veins in the legs. You don't see it in countries where they don't sit in chairs. In countries like India and so forth, varicose veins are very rare. And it's a combination of 2 things. 1, they don't sit in chairs as much. And 2, they use whole grains in their diet so that there's not as much congestion in the bowel, pressing on and pushing on the veins down into the legs. They have 2 or 3 easy bowel movements a day with a lot of fiber in the diet, and that helps prevent hemorrhoids and varicose veins. But it's mainly the pooling by sitting for long periods of time with the legs dangling down in chairs that causes this kind of circulation problem in the feet. So this position is really so beneficial for all of us to avoid chairs. It's fairly simple. To me, if we'd been meant to sit in chairs, we would have been born with a chair attached. Really. Because we weren't, we're meant to sit, and this is much better hemodynamically and structurally. It keeps the back straighter. Most chairs aren't designed for the human spine. They're designed for looks or effects or stacking or folding or whatever. And they are designed for a medium-sized spine, not for your particular spine. So it's better to use your own muscles to support the back. We see a lot of back problems in this country. A lot of people with slip discs, back pain, low back pain, syndrome. All this is very common in our culture. But if you go to other cultures where they sit for long periods of time using their own back muscles, you don't see the kind of back problems. And the reason is, once the back muscles become weak, it's much easier for you to stretch over, pick up something, and slip a disc, because the back muscles don't hold the vertebra properly. Developing the back muscles is one nice benefit of using the lotus position. So it's a great position for meditation because it allows the blood flow to come up to the higher centers. And we need all the blood supply to the mind during meditation that we can get to keep it alert enough to develop mind control, which is really tough. So we need everything to be able to control this monkey up here. And that's why this is such a useful pose to develop, as far as the energy currents, the stability, the blood supply, and so forth. An alternative is Vajrasana, the diamond pose, used in Japanese culture. And it may be a contributing factor to why you rarely see overweight Japanese people, because this pose is recommended for digestion. And part of the reason is because it does cut down the blood supply to the legs. As you sit here forward, it's cutting the blood supply. And this allows more blood to flow to the abdominal area. Also, the heels resting on the back part of the base of the spine sort of open up and relax the base of the spine, so it helps with the lower part of the colon and digestive tract. So that it's said that if you sit in this position for about 15 minutes, you'll pass gas. You can try that experiment sometime. Just allow 15 minutes. You don't need to try it tonight, but when you're off somewhere, no roommates around or anything, try it, and after a while you'll notice it really does work. It's also said that if you eat a full meal and sit in this position for half an hour, you can eat another full meal. But you don't need to try that. You could try it, I suppose. Again, you're allowing the spine to be nice and straight in this position, although you can sort of slip forward and bend your shoulders. We call this tamasana around the ajna. Tamas being the slothful state. So you can slip forward, but it does then, if you lean back into the pose, allow you to have that full shoulders back, spine straight, much more than you could do while you're sitting in a chair. And it's recommended, particularly Vajrasana, for digestion while you're eating and for a while after eating, especially people who have digestive problems, to sit in 10 minutes or so. When we eat, usually we eat at chairs and tables. We lean forward and eat like this. It's absolutely the worst thing for the digestive organs because we're crunching them all up, when we really want to allow them to have plenty of room to work and plenty of blood supply. So I'd advise you to consider getting rid of the chairs and tables. Or if you don't want to do that, just sitting in Vajrasana, you can do that even in a restaurant if nobody is too concerned about the way you look, or on the subway or whatever. Just taking the opportunity to sit in this position whenever it's practical. And you can sit at dining room table still in Vajrasana, even if you're sitting in a chair. Yeah.
Can you explain more fully how sitting in this position affects the colon?
Well, if you turn to the side, you'll see that his feet are stimulating these points. These are acupuncture points for the lower intestine. And also it puts a pressure forward on the base of the spine. And this is where the nerves come out that control the rectum, right around here. So you get a little bit of subtle pressure and opening in the spine. It's really a good solid position here.
When you sit in lotus for a long time, or any of the positions that limit the circulation to the legs, doesn't that hurt the legs?
If you sit and your legs fall asleep, that's the body telling you, I don't have enough blood supply. But if you sit and your legs feel moderately comfortable, then they're getting enough blood supply. They're not doing any special work at that point. So it's good to develop gradual postures. Always better than to strain. So in the beginning, only as long as it's comfortable. And it would not be advisable to sit for any period of time with the legs asleep. because that means that the body isn't getting enough blood supply. You could sit for short periods of time, but not longer than, say, a few minutes like that. Because you could do pinch a nerve, not enough blood supply to the legs to do their work. So it's a gradual developing. What might be helpful is just to take a regular blanket and fold it 4 times, or fold it twice, so that it's first halved and then halved again. That makes a nice cushion. When you're beginning to meditate, it's just about enough blood supply to the buttocks when you're sitting in, if you sit in lotus. It allows enough blood supply to come through the buttocks area to supply the legs, even though you're partly cutting off circulation.
I had heard, I don't even remember when, that if you limit the supply of blood to a certain section, I guess maybe I heard that in connection with Chunafix especially, that cells die in the area that's not receiving blood, and doesn't get oxygen or something.
Well, it's not a full tourniquet is what you're giving. And so as long as the legs don't fall asleep, you're all right. They're getting enough blood supply. And they're not turning blue or anything like that. So again, it should be with a good cushion underneath the buttocks so there is good blood supply. The body is constantly deciding where to put the blood. And there are 3 major areas. It can either send the blood to the arms and legs if you're running down the road, or to the digestive tract, or to the vital organs, brain, heart, and so forth. And it's distributing this blood constantly between these different areas. That's why if you eat a full meal and then try to run down the road, you either get a cramp in your leg or a cramp in your stomach, because it doesn't want to put 2 places at once. And that's also why every major religion has fasting associated with it. Because when blood supply is going to the stomach, not as much is available to the brain. And you feel sleepy after you eat. So that this kind of circulatory regulation is what we're dealing with the yoga postures too. So we'll go on from structure to talk a little bit about digestion, because really digestion is the key. You are what you eat, and the body's made out of it. So digestion really begins in the mind, so we'll make a little mark up here. Because it's our approach to food that allows us to have the capacity to digest it. And they did some studies with people who they put some tubes in and measured their digestive enzymes, the juices that come out into the stomach and in through the pancreatic duct into the digestive tract to split up the food. It's really amazing what they're doing. They're turning broccoli and carrots into teeth and bones, and it's truly incredible what the body is doing. Changing red cabbage into blood, and cauliflowers into ears. Totally amazing. So this process requires a lot of energy from all the enzymes and so forth, from the blood supply going to there to accomplish this. And by measuring this, then they had these patients in a room, and they